Yusef, we're back.
Hello. Thank you for having me on in person.
Exactly.
Well.
A bit of a special treat for us, but also the listeners too.
Very much. I've got an admission to make before we start, because I have made a horrifically racist error, and this is why I extended my trip to Glasgow. So there's a chap we were just discussing called Gavin McKinney, who messaged me a while back saying, "Hey Yusef, it'd be great to have you on the podcast, but it's in Glasgow. So, you know, if you happen to be in Glasgow at any point," I was like, "Oh, well, I can't imagine I will be anytime soon, but thank you." And then I got invited to speak at the British Association of Dermatologists, and I was like, "Oh, well, I'll message." Who was that charismatic, good-looking Scottish podcaster that got it? Well, of course it was Colin, because I was on his last time. So I sent you a message being like, "I'd love to take you up on the offer," and you were like, "Oh, sweet, I booked you in." And then afterwards, I checked my inbox history, and I was like, "Oh, it's Gavin." And
you had two good-looking, handsome, articulate Scottish podcasters inviting you.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So I was like, well, it feels really rude to sack off the guy who actually invited me to do this. But I was like, well, I have to just extend the trip. So
yeah, and it's going to be worth it, because we're going to go and train at Extreme 2 after this as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
A cool venue as well. But am I still allowed to call you Dr. Yusef Smith?
I don't know. How long do you need to be out? When the last time I saw a patient was 6 months ago. So when do I lose my...
I don't know.
My cred.
surely Twitter told you when you announced that you were leaving the NHS. They were like, you either were stripped immediately, or there was, I don't know, maybe there was like a resignation period like Boris is enjoying.
Yeah, true. There's a guy on Twitter who just comments on all my posts saying like, "Stop pretending to be a doctor," and he's just convinced in the face of all evidence, like even like footage of me like taking blood samples and stuff. He's like, "No, you're faking it." It's like, well,
yeah, that's just crisis actors that are paid to sit with you to make the NHS look busy or whatever.
Exactly.
Oh, that's alarming. But when you did announce that to Twitter, what was the reaction like?
I wrote that thread as a throwaway thing. Just, I had some kind of ranty thoughts in my head. I thought, I'll just bash it out as a thread, and that will kind of neatly sort of nip off that aspect of my life. But it went viral. I've had, in fact, I had the One Show get in touch with me this morning asking me to come on there, and like Al Jazeera, ITV, iNews, all these kind of, and Daily Mirror and all that stuff. And I was like, and it blew up as a thread. And looking back, it's like, oh, well, of course, like, because as you know, people share stuff on social media as a way to signal, I'm part of this group, or this is my, and so there was a lot of retweets of like, "Look, Boris, look what you've done. This lovely young man has left the NHS, and it's all because of you, and the Conservative Party have ruined it." And so anyone who was pro NHS or anti-Tory used it as a platform to share. But really, it was just personally, I thought, just get it down as some kind of reflections of experience working in the NHS, and also how that compared to when you're running a small business and you're a very lean operation, and any systems that are inefficient, you can very easily pivot, and you're experiencing the opposite.
That was one of the big themes of our conversation the last time, like the massive juxtaposition between the efficient kind of productive life that you try and live with propane in your personal life, and the kind of technology that was so clunky within the NHS, where I think you joked about if there was an S missing on one of the keyboards on the particular computer,
Not
you wouldn't be able to use it. Yeah, it was actually true, yeah, which is horrifying. Yeah. Equally, I find it funny that the One Show and stuff like that are picking up stuff now, whereas you did a video on YouTube, which genuinely, if you were interested in reforming the NHS and improving it and helping it, rather than just like using it as a political like sword to wield, they would have looked at how you spent your time as a junior doctor, because you broke down the mass inefficiencies within the day where you weren't able to help people, which is ultimately what you were in the health service to do. Yeah,
and there's a blind spot to this. And I think we discussed it briefly, where I was saying that when they bring in management consultants, for example, to talk about, make slides about vision and narrative and try and collect data on this, the clinicians and the people on the front line are the ones who are experiencing the daily delays. And I sound like a real stickler when I'm saying like, oh, there's a 7-second delay when you click on this button, and then to prescribe a drug, there's 10 clicks, and each one has like a 6 to 10 second delay. But these things add up so much, because if they're the daily frictions of something which is done multiple million times a day, when you multiply the number of people prescribing a drug, that those things become very expensive, but we have a blind spot to it because they're not quantified. And so when there's no feedback loop that's going up the chain, and you've got the industrious type people who go into healthcare, they're not doing it for the money, they're they're really fueled by a lot of goodwill. And so they'll just hold together a lot of these bad systems and just kind of take it on the chin. And so this stuff doesn't get fed up the chain. And so there's a broken feedback loop. And so, it is something that surely, bit of a controversial opinion here, but if you just financially incentivized clinicians to make system and process improvements and made it easy for that to be the case, particularly user interface, I just think this is massive, then we would solve so many of these things without having to kind of like look at this big system and be like, oh, it's duct taped together, but we can't make any changes to it because then it'll require like a whole upheaval.
The hardest part of change with the NHS is that the patient care has to be ongoing. There can't be like, I think it was, we spoke about PwC or EY who came in and they were like, we're gonna have to do this, and they were like, well, we can't pause.
You can't pause live patient care, and yeah, exactly. So you've constantly got to be making updates as you're delivering care, and even like a 5-minute, 10-minute downtime on the system is really significant. I spoke to a guy called Josh Case, who was a junior doctor in Australia. Similar situation to me, but he learned to code so that he could solve a particular problem in his daily workflow. Really high agency guy. Basically, he was working on a surgical job and he had to pull out data from the surgical theatre list, pull out the name, date of birth, site of operation, operation type it into a spreadsheet or a Word document, and that became the handover sheet. And he was like, well, I'm doing this as a repetitive task. Let's just write a script that pulls out that data, minimizes human error, typos, time saving. And he went back and forth with the IT department of his hospital. And it took 8 months of back and forth with going through all the red tape to implement this, what is effectively a very simple script to get this sorted. And it saved his trust. He estimated 400 grand a year. And he left because he was like, I can't handle the amount of, like, the actual implementation was so simple, but it just required so many layers of bureaucracy to get it implemented.
And when we're talking about the kind of people that are holding the NHS and health services in other countries together, they are hardworking, diligent, motivated by like maybe like a cause that's almost greater than themselves in terms of helping on to others. But that can only fall back on the quality of systems. Like it's the James Clear quote, isn't it? Like you fall back to the quality of your systems in terms of like, rather than the goals or the lofty ambitions that you hold.
And if you're systemically disincentivizing the people who are trying to improve that system, you can't expect any kind of big improvement. So yeah.
When we spoke about you choosing to leave investment banking and go and do your medical degree, you looked at 4 currencies that instructed your decision, as well as some influence from David Data. Is that how I pronounce that? Which is interesting because that book could get you in quite a lot of trouble nowadays. Apparently that's not like a particularly politically correct book.
Yeah, it's a bit un-PC, for sure. I mean, you got to take it with a pinch of salt. You got to read it like poetry rather than take anything too literally about it. Yeah.
But you looked at 4 currencies to help you make that decision. How did you make this particular decision? So rather than leaving investment banking and going to do a medical degree while running Propane, this is now very much you leaving behind that period of work where you got yourself into being a junior doctor, completing that, and now you've had this kind of move away and back into Propane full time.
So for anyone that's interested in this, I would definitely recommend listening to our first conversation. I think it was very fresh in my mind as well. But the 4 currencies, so money, freedom of time, freedom of location, and satisfaction. And by the point that I left, the decision had kind of been made for me because Propane had gained enough momentum that it was like, okay, there's a natural break in the career at the pre-specialty training completion point. So it was easy enough for me. I think for a lot of medics and a lot of people in healthcare, they feel the sense of sunk cost, and also that like, oh, but my skills aren't transferable, so I guess I've just got to do this. And they just have to take the real pay cut every year. And particularly, I feel the worst for nurses because they're just getting hammered, and they work so hard. They're so smart, so well trained, and yeah. So you said, how did I make that decision?
Yeah, so obviously the currencies must have changed over time in terms of how you value them, and that's very fiscal discussion there, isn't it? But if we look at those 4 currencies, you at some point must have decided that investment banking didn't meet those, and now you've decided that Propane meets those more than medicine.
And so we also talked about the kind of window of risk or the window of opportunity that medicine, luckily, is not going anywhere. I'm not interested in being a hotshot hematologist or cardiothoracic surgeon or something. So going into general practice training, you can pick that up where you left off. online business moves really fast, and so you have to just pick up the opportunity while you can. In terms of investment banking, I think the easiest way for anyone that's sat maybe slightly at odds with their job and thinking, is this really something I want to be in or not? And they're struggling to, and obviously you mentioned the comfort of a regular salary and a lot of the kind of structure that you get in the social interaction of a job is very much enough to keep you in there, even if you don't enjoy the actual job itself. So maybe the easiest way to look at it is, what's my boss doing? So if I get my head down, I'm a good boy and I work really hard, in 10 years, where will I be? And you'll find either your boss or his senior manager or whatever, and you go, okay, is he happy? Or would I be happy doing what he's doing every day? If not, then the answer's been
because that's what's coming down the line if you continue on their path and the same approach. Yeah, it's very funny, isn't it? What other factors did you consider in terms of what were the pulling factors? Obviously, propane's tipped over into an area where you're like, right, I need to go all in. There's that factor where timing wise it works out nicely, but what else was maybe pushing you out of the NHS?
So to be fair to the NHS, like, I think if propane didn't exist, I'd probably still be doing GP training and then creating a portfolio career of some sort. Because I think as a consultant GP or a qualified GP, you can design your week as you want. And a lot of people, I know a guy who runs a medical education website, biggest in the world, still does GP training 1 day a week, does some education. So it's quite nice to like have that variety. But there are record numbers of junior doctors leaving the NHS now, and just morale is just tanking. Pay.
Do you think it's mostly pandemic related, or you've mentioned pay there?
I think both. Yeah, like we'll be paying for the pandemic for years to come.
Yeah,
but hours, pay, recognition, like I think we talked as well about the idea of like the clap for NHS. Like, oh yeah, that's very nice that the public has a recognition for this stuff, but I prefer a pay rise. I'd prefer the actual employer to recognize that rather than the general public kind of like acknowledging like, oh, we know that
you guys do a really hard job. We're not sure you're remunerated in line with what you would be if this was a private company providing this service.
Yeah, 100%. And I think our generation don't drink the Kool-Aid as much. We're much less on board with the idea of like, oh, well, you pick a direction and that's your career and so people are starting to recognize that, there is opportunity outside of this. And with my skill set, with my level of training or industriousness and all of that goes into becoming a nurse, becoming a doctor, you could get a much higher ROI on your time with something else.
Yeah, we're in a period that some people have christened, and I know you probably steal clear of LinkedIn, and I've talked with Johnny before, your business partner, about LinkedIn. He absolutely despises the platform.
He got the short straw with that. I got Twitter, he got LinkedIn.
Yeah, we were saying that on LinkedIn there's actually a thing they're talking about called the Great Resignation, and it's a huge migration of talent away from jobs kind of post-pandemic into a society or an environment where people are like, well, I've not had the pay rise in line with inflation, or my pay rise or my conditions have changed, where maybe you want me back in the office 5 days and I don't agree with that, or maybe you're not letting me come back to the office at all and you expect me to work from home 5 days and I don't want that either. So many people are leaving corporate jobs, and it's interesting that that's also been experienced within junior doctors, a lot from a pay perspective, but also from like maybe a feeling value perspective.
It's interesting it's happening in there as well, because obviously that's out of my area now. I've only got the kind of lens of seeing within healthcare. But yeah, I guess once people see the option of working from home or having like, because I guess it wasn't even a thing pre-pandemic really. So now that that's become an option, you're like, oh, actually, I can get more done. I don't have to. Speaking of which, did you see the promo for Metaverse with Zuckerberg like going through the?
I've not watched it, but I've seen people react to it, which is that's the most social media thing ever, isn't it? You see people react to an in-depth piece of content, like you see their 30-second reaction clip, but no, talk us through it.
The reason I'm bringing this up is because obviously the fundamental rules have changed, and people are starting to say, oh, I can actually design how I want my work day to look. And there was a bit in there that made me nauseous. It was someone demonstrating like working at the office, and he's sat there and he's got the goggles on and he's like got these virtual screens, and he's like, and then someone he's in his house, and then like Angela walks past. He's like, oh, hey, Angela, how's the project coming along? And she's like, oh, very good, Greg. What about the prototype? And he's like, well, we can show you. And it's like, I don't want Angela walking through my kitchen. Like, this is the point of working from home. Like I'm such an antisocial bastard though. I just want to be at my desk doing my own thing. So yeah, it's do you think that's going to take off, or is it just
so people like you and I are a little bit less willing to allow that to happen, because I think maybe you have, well, I particularly have concerns about what that would mean for like the real world. Mm-hmm. Like, have you seen Ready Player One? That's like my idea of a nightmare, like this sedated, like poor, pretty unhappy population who just completely delve into a virtual world for escapism. Like that, like I think already like Netflix and Love Island and stuff like that, which like albeit have their time and their place, people who just sedate themselves from like really unhappy existences with stuff like that and maybe drink drugs on the weekend, you're like, wow, like you would be super susceptible to put this helmet on and you can live whatever life you want. They'd be like, fine.
Yeah, and it's an understandably, or it's a justifiable option. If you're in a lot of pain and you're like, God, the chasm to try and bring my 3D world into something that's livable is so big that it's easier to put on a headset. And the ultimate progression of all this would be, having an IV line of burgers and dopamine and wearing your headset.
That's the meme, isn't it? The guy sitting there in his mum's basement just plugged in.
Well, like it's a meme, but I feel like if we're getting one step closer each time, I do wonder what the eventual outcome is going to be.
Yeah. I think actually, by the time this episode comes out, I've released an episode on central bank digital currency. And I spoke to a guy who's based in China who has witnessed them build it. And like, if you are a conspiracy theorist and you're willing to like explore all these different things, that opens the door for things like UBI more easily. It opens the door for like just the state having more and more control. And for me, I've always been quite big on like personal responsibility and like personal freedoms. I think with things like meta and escapism and just sedating the population to be happy and just a bit more docile, which is a horrible term, isn't it? Like, like if you were to really think of like how you want to live your life in terms of your values, one of the least appealing words to describe you would be he lives quite a docile existence. And I think that's where like meta would open the door to.
I can see why it very much comes up against your personal values as well. Like it's a real jarring thing. And you know, they're starting to do it with animals. You've seen where they put cows on a VR headset with green pastures so that they're less stressed. And this idea of, I don't know if it's being rolled out or not, but I read an article about vertical chicken farming. Have you heard about this?
No.
So to save space, they pack chickens vertically and they cut out their frontal cortex so that they effectively don't suffer. They're just kind of meat machines. And I don't know how you would do it in practice, but like the fact that it's even been raised as a thing, you're like, where is this going? And if I
would love to hear Alex Jones's take on something like that.
Yeah, I did a video about Alex Jones's claim of turning the frogs gay. Have you heard that? You know, the classic, he's turning the frogs gay, and like people that became memed because it's people were like, Alex, that's a ridiculous thing to say. But there's a guy called a channel called Oki's Weird Mysteries.
Yeah,
and he looked at this claim and went down the rabbit hole and tried to figure out like what was the origin of this. Turns out it's probably the one time that me and Alex Jones will have some kind of overlap with our view. It was looking at a company called Syngenta, who some kind of chemical manufacturing company. They were having waste products into a nearby river, and the regulators were like, "Oh, we need to check that this isn't damaging the ecosystem." So because there was claims that it was causing intersex traits in frogs and altered sexual behavior. So they hired commissioned one of their own scientists, Tyrone Hayes, to do a study and try and demonstrate that it wasn't damaging the ecosystem. Tyrone's findings were that it was, and confirmed that it was causing endocrine disruption and intersex characteristics. And so they then tried to discredit him and suppress his findings. And it's basically like they sent private investigators around him, tried to ruin his marriage, so it's really frightening that actually
big organizations, when they feel backed into a corner, they will fight very dirty, and they have the resources to fight dirty in a way that you couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Alex Jones threw enough shit at a wall. Some of it did stick.
Some of it did. Yeah, I've not seen much of his stuff, but I did a little video about it, and the comments were just like, "Oh, but he was right about everything," and then there's always people saying, "Oh, but actually, like." He talks about Sandy Hook and all these kind of the actors. Drama actors.
You found a part of the internet, and I think that happens sometimes where you're just like, this was not who was intended to see this, and now I'm in trouble.
And it's the same happened with the NHS thread. Like, I don't want to be known as the guy who left the NHS. Like, I'm just a person who runs a marketing consultancy for fitness coaches. But it's posting that, it gained 5,000 followers on Twitter, and they're all not relevant to our target audience. And you're like, oh, well, yeah, you tap on a live wire on organic media, and you're like, oh, that blew up more than I expected.
Yeah, and it's always the ones that you maybe don't intentionally expect to have that result. And you're like,
True.
I'm not sure I want you guys here, but you're welcome. Just at some point, if you have somebody that's interested in running a fitness business, if you just pass them on to me. Yeah. No, it is funny. What would have to happen for you to return to medicine?
Oh,
the internet get turned off tomorrow, and fitness be banned in the metaverse.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid
two scenarios.
I think if that happened, I'd go back to medicine. I'd still probably be looking at ways to build out a week that I enjoy. I think we talked about the idea of, so you've got the 4 currencies. One of the big ones that people go into medicine for is satisfaction and impact. Now, I don't think that doing 70-hour clinical work weeks is twice as satisfying as doing 35-hour clinical work weeks. So I don't think it's a linear trade-off. And actually, Ali Abdal, who's a famous junior doctor who left to now run his channel and multiple income streams, he highlighted this by saying that, like, oh, if I run a business, then I'm not saving lives. And you're like, well, how many lives does a doctor save in their life? Average is something like 6 or 8 lives, like direct attributable lives saved. Obviously, there's a lot more contribution to kind of improving quality of life and all that stuff. But he was like, if I really want to optimize for that metric, become a millionaire and then donate to the Malaria Foundation, and number of mosquito nets. I think it's like £2,000 per life saved that you can generate. So like, that's a much more efficient way to achieve that goal. So really, if I'm just doing it for the personal satisfaction of saving lives and the warm fuzzy feeling, then that's more of a personal bias. And he's like, fine to do that, but just to be aware that that's where you're optimizing for. Johnny always says, this is such a like accidentally profound thing that he said, which is, you've got to put the Facebook pixel somewhere. So in the world of paid ads, like, you're optimizing for conversion on a particular landing page or whatever. And so you got to put the Facebook pixel somewhere to say, right, that's what I'm optimizing for. And you can't, regardless of where you put it, that's where the resources will go. So yeah,
that is profound, isn't it? Yeah. Like, you have to choose something, like whether it's what you absolutely have always wanted or not. And Ali choosing to financially leverage and get as much out of it as possible to then have an impact, maybe less directly, but still very directly, because it's his capital and it's his money that's enabling that. But although he's maybe not at the side of the bed in the hospital, like resuscitating or saving somebody's life. Exactly. One of the most interesting things, I think, since you've gone full time into Propane, is your ability to just double down on the organic content. Like, you've created so much over the years. Like, your YouTube channel has videos from like 11 years ago, for example. Some of them got crazy views as well, like deadlift videos and like reactions and stuff like that.
It's a similar thing to this. It's why I love YouTube as a platform, because as opposed to feed-based platforms where after 48 hours, like, if you stop posting, people have forgotten about you, the keywords and the kind of search-based and long tail effects of YouTube are fantastic. Like, we'll sometimes generate sales from a video that we made 5-6 years ago. And I was doing a fecal disimpaction, like scooping poo out of someone's bum at 2 a.m. Last year, and thinking, like, I'm so sick of this. Like, this is like £7 an hour effective hourly rate. And then I came out of the room, took my gloves off, washed my hands, checked my phone, and I had a Stripe notification for £7.99. It was just like the universe just being like, like, that's the leverage of an ebook that I wrote years prior.
Oh, somebody just purchased it through Gumroad or something like that.
Yeah, at 2 a.m. And it was kind of like the universe just saying, like, so £7, and you can earn it either exchanging time.
And you did this a long time ago as well, so it's like,
yeah, it was a book that I wrote about, like a pull-up program. And so I think content is a fantastic way to find your voice and generate your. And I know you said this is a great kind of side benefit of the podcast, is that even if it didn't take off financially, you're still winning the game because you're generating skills and you're talking to interesting people and all that.
Like the people I get to speak to, wild. Like we were talking before we hit record about Daniel Crosby. Like, would I have been able to speak to him if I didn't have a top 1.5% podcast in the world? He probably wouldn't have taken his random Zoom call with me just off a LinkedIn message.
Yeah.
Unless I had an audience to share with him or some credibility to say, like, I'm going to ask him interesting questions.
It's mad, and you're adding so much value to your listeners as well. Like I do see you as a master of your craft. Like the way that you construct interviews, the way that you manage to, it's such a hard skill. Like, I am terrible at interviewing people. Like, we occasionally have people on our podcast, and I'm just rubbish at it. And it really, when you do it, and it's a bit like golf, or like you see someone swinging a stick about, and you're like, oh, I could have a go at that. That looks all right. And you give it a go, and you're like, oh, okay, there's a lot more nuance to having to.
So many break points. Like I play golf, so yeah, like there's so many different points in the swing where it can go wrong, apart from just where you hit the ball. So like everything that happens before it and everything that happens after it, apart from the point of impact, can can impact. So it's the exact same with the podcast in terms of like the prep before it and the discussions during it, and then obviously the after stuff, which is the kind of more arduous stuff. And I've spoke to you and Johnny on your podcast about like the kind of back end stuff where you're getting people to build a clip and promote it and put it on TikTok and put it on Reels and put it on Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and try and garner an audience through that. That's like the much more arduous part. Whereas I quite like the prep and the interview itself. It's like
it's all the bitty after. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kind of annoyed at ourselves for trying to, because we're spread quite evenly across Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. And I kind of wish I just picked a platform and nailed it early on. But now it's quite hard to kind of, because we also have roughly equal conversion from different platforms too. Yep. So yeah, I think like starting again, I'd probably just pick one platform, whichever one matches your
skill set. But like, so for example, you and Johnny differ greatly in that you are so comfortable now in front of the camera doing either short form or like longer, or like short form for like Reels or long form for YouTube. And Johnny is just an absolute behemoth when it comes to like how do I structure and target this particular ad on Facebook, and he can write the copy for it or whatever else, and like he just masters that.
Like I'm the bloke with the railgun that's just firing everywhere, and he's like the sniper that's or like the heat-seeking missile. You know, he's just super targeted adverts for things, and he just spends his life just in Google Analytics and in the spreadsheets, and yeah.
But I like that you being full-time now has freed you up to react to even more, because those are the videos that I always enjoyed that you've done. And one of those recent ones has been when calories were introduced onto menus. And that means that you can give quite a nuanced take from having dealt with so many people through the NHS, but also run a fitness business where people who probably gravitate towards that are like so pro it, whereas you probably experienced both sides of the argument because of that.
Yeah, very much. It's a good framing for that too, because as a doctor, the patients that come to you for lifestyle advice, healthcare is free at the point of delivery, so there isn't a skin in the game financially, and there's a huge difference in motivation, self-education, social background, all of that stuff. And we talked about the ACE index as well, which is the childhood factors that would lead to someone struggling more with their weight or with their motivation and all these kind of things. And then you've got the people who come to me for fitness coaching, and they've already put their money where their mouth is. They've probably already got a training program. They're going to the gym already. You know, what they want is like optimization. And so it's a very different population.
Hugely different populations.
So I do think that the calories on menus thing, they've missed the audience with this, because I imagine you've just done a photo shoot, you've probably been tracking meticulously.
Yeah.
If you go out for a meal, you're like checking on the restaurant chain's website and looking for the calories on there. Like you don't really need this. It's nice, it's convenient to have it on the menu directly, but you probably still would go out and look for the calories on there.
It'll be in my fitness pal before I go. like for like it, particularly in the prep for a photo shoot, and even in the last few weeks before, you probably can't even eat out, to be honest. But even like kind of year round, I do like to like leave a particular amount, or I'll know roughly that pizza is going to be 800 calories, or that steak and chips is 900, and it's mostly protein and fat.
And you've pre-planned the rest of your day and how you can create the buffer and all that.
Yeah.
So the people who are tracking calories, it's neither here nor there. It's slightly more convenient, but that's it. And that's why a lot of PTs are quite happy with it, because for them, brilliant. Like they can, but for someone who is obese and doesn't have an awareness of calories, and they're not tracking the rest of the day, go to McDonald's and it's like, okay, that's 750 calories. Okay,
what does that mean?
What does what does that mean? Like, do I know how much I'm taking in? Do I know what my?
Because their bowl of cereal in the morning in their toast could be 300 or it could be 900. They have no concept.
Especially cereal, bloody dangerous, isn't it?
30-gram serving.
Oh yeah, have you seen a 30-gram serving on a bowl?
Yeah, poverty.
So yeah, you're right. Like, it's missing the mark with the audience. There's also the consideration of eating disorders, that someone who's going out, because
this was the most visceral reaction online from females within the fitness community, who a number of them have come from like an ED background, and you see that quite a lot, like girls who have come from that eating disorder challenge becoming like bikini competitors or coaches, and
then becoming eating disorder recovery coaches, armchair psychiatrists.
We need to be very careful with that demographic, don't we? But that was the most visceral reaction, where I saw girls in that community, but also girls who are just generally like kind of holding themselves up as quite compassionate, to be like, have nobody thought about how triggering this can be? And I wonder, do you think people did think about how triggering it could be?
I don't think policymakers do, because I think they probably don't consider all the angles, but
which is what they're paid to do.
Well, yeah. But yeah, you could argue that when you go to a restaurant, that's maybe the time that you don't want to be thinking about your calories. And also, it's one meal out of, unless you're eating out every day, like it's not the majority of your meals. So really, if that's the only meal that you know the calories for, it's also kind of neither here nor there. The thing about someone with an eating disorder, again, like if they really wanted to know, they would look it up. But I think it's more of a social impact, that if you're going out with a friend and you know that one of them's got an eating disorder, and you go like, oh, can we have the menu without the calories for her? But it almost
awful.
shines a spot. Yeah. How humiliating is that? If like, so yeah, it introduces another layer of awkwardness. I don't know what
to play devil's advocate. I saw somebody say the percentage of people with an eating disorder is much lower than the percentage of obesity that we have in the UK.
Yes.
Like, so they were playing devil's advocate to say, like, we have to pick our poison here. Which one's more important?
Yeah. And I suppose the question is also the effectiveness. Like, will having the calories on the menus
help obesity?
Yeah.
At the moment, probably not.
I
wrote
a couple of things on it. Yeah. But I suppose food quality, like, some people have criticized it for saying, oh, it just shifts the focus to total calories and ignores food quality. Probably one of my blind spots personally. I imagine one of yours, because the food quality decision making is kind of automatic for us. Like, that's not something we have to consciously make a decision about. When you're eating day to day, you're thinking like, what are my macros and how do I hit that? Because of course it's not going to be from margarine, not spooning in the double cream or whatever. So yeah, there's that. There's the hypervigilance, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible because it's convenient for me, but I'm not the target audience.
Yeah, it works well for me, but like, so rather than having it on the menu, if every restaurant wants to have it on their website, fine, because that maybe makes my job easier. I also interestingly thought that some of them have been like overestimated, because I've guesstimated and like tracked for maybe 8 years probably.
You get a really good eye for it. You can look at a potato and be like,
yeah,
that's 80 grams.
Yeah. And then you can also like, you can taste something in a restaurant and be like, I mean, this has been cooked in so much oil. Like my guess here has just been way off. It tastes too good to be however many calories.
Yeah.
But if that was on the website, that maybe takes away some of the challenge for me. But I also think like, I went out for a pizza and I was like, what if they cooked this in for this small pizza to be like 900 calories in the menu? Because like a margarita pizza isn't, especially if it's like an Italian made one, unless it's like Domino's and Pizza Hut, which is just, there's
Domino's
so much junk in.
Gratuitous, isn't it?
Yeah.
3,000 calories for a large pizza.
Yeah, absurd. And you don't get much eating for it, which I just find bizarre. Whereas like if you go for like an Italian made pizza, unless they've like drizzled it in loads of olive oil, you're kind of like, well, this is actually, it's bread and tomato and like,
yeah, how can it be 900 calories?
Yeah, exactly. So I think they have erred on the side of caution as well, because there are like even like meal prep companies. Like I recently did a deal with a new meal prep company in the last like 4 or 5 months, and one of my biggest reassurances was like, for the food that you give me, like how confident are you that this actually is like a 500 calorie steak, greens, and sweet potato meal? Or like, how confident are you that this chicken stir fry is 650 calories with 40 grams of protein? Because you see some meal preps and you're like, there's no way that is 400 calories. Like there's 40 grams of protein. So like, where are the rest of the calories going?
They're just skimping on the chicken and whatever. Yeah. I suppose with that stuff, like if it's meal prep, usually it's 2 or 3 ingredients, isn't it? So you can just weigh out the chicken if you're really concerned. But for me, like especially with a meal prep company, I don't. So Joe currently does mine, and I've just got it as one entry on my macro factor.
Yep.
Because I'm happy if there's variance between recipes and things, because I know that relatively it'll average out if that's all I'm eating every day, and then I can just make adjustments in chunks, which is a bit easier.
Yeah, that's huge. But yeah, there was a restaurant in Glasgow that was quite famously caught out. And they're like a fitness restaurant. They were caught out just massively under-reporting the calories that were within their meals, and massively over-reporting protein. And it made the daily record in the Sun and all that nonsense. So
this is lovely. Like,
yeah, exactly. I remember going, and it was like this kind of like not fried, but like it was their equivalent of like a fried chicken burger. And it was like, there's no way that this can be 400 calories. Like I just don't know how that's possible. The bun itself will be like 200.
Yeah.
And it was because there's a big bit of bread. No, absolutely wild. One of the other pieces of content I really liked was you had your home professionally organized. And for those that have heard you on the previous episode and even during this conversation so far, they'll realize that you are somebody that is quite on point, organized, seeking like maximal productivity. What were the big things that they changed about your house?
So my house was, I thought I was relatively minimal, but you know, because I've had to move. I used to live in Edinburgh. You have to move out during the festival, or you get charged quadruple rent, and so you end up whittling down your stuff to barely anything. So I've moved like 20 times over the last 12 years or so. But even still, I think the actual organization of that stuff, sometimes you just have a chaos cupboard and you're just like, oh, just chuck it all in there. And what she did was 3 stages. So it was sort, purge, and organize. So sorting was literally pulling everything out of the cupboards, all the drawers and stuff, looking at what is redundant. And she plays bad cop with you, and she's like, right, you've got 16 shirts here, throw away 8 of them and give me the best ones. Or this one's got a hole in, this one, whatever. And she'll just like ruthlessly chuck stuff away. Obviously, you know, with consent, but I think I need a bit of that.
And you're not a hoarder either, so
no, I'm a digital hoarder, definitely.
Okay, yeah, I could have guessed that.
Yeah, but just notes and things. But yeah, so that was a really useful process. And then just having an objective eye as well, as with hiring any coach. Because it's the kind of thing most people would be like, I don't need to hire a professional organizer. That's a bit of a wanky thing to do. I can do it myself. And you're like, all right, how long have you wanted to do a home organization for? Oh, at least the last 2 years. Okay, how long would it take you? 6 hours. So why haven't you done it yet? Because you just need someone to come in and be like, right,
you probably underestimate 6 hours as well. It's probably going to be more than that.
Yeah, true. Like there was just the fact that there was 2 bodies. So me and her both like sorting through stuff quickly meant that we could bash through it. But yeah, you can see the time lapse of the organization on the YouTube videos. So I just set up a camera. And luckily, she was all right with it as well. I was like, do you mind if I just like film
probably
bits of this?
Good promotion for her, and
yeah, it was good marketing for her. I suppose I interviewed her at the end and talked about the kind of philosophy of it and stuff.
Yeah. What were the big things that surprised you that got purged?
I think the stuff that got purged, I kind of expected. It was just being prompted to do it. There's always stuff that you're holding on to. You're like, oh, maybe I'll wear that at some point or whatever. And she was like, look, when did you last wear it? Get rid. Papers is always a difficult one because you can't. You have to go through and read each one, and you know, old council tax bills and proof of address and birth certificates and all that kind of stuff. But she's very big on kind of have each thing having a place and having labels for grouping similar items, and it's probably all basic stuff for the Marie Kondo fans, but for me, I just needed someone to hold me by the hand and take me through it.
Yeah. Was there anything that she did that particularly surprised you then? Like you kind of knew what needed to go, but she was the reasoned professional voice that enabled you to do it. Was there anything that you were just like, oh wow, I never thought I would need to improve on this area?
I don't think I was too surprised, but I asked her where did I rate on a 1 to 10, and I think she said I was like a 3 or a 4 in terms of where 10 is mega hoarder, can't see the floor in your house.
Okay, cool.
And 1 is like pristine home. She said that there was one household that she threw away 1,700 odd socks. So I don't even know how many matched socks they had. It was a family of multiple kids and stuff, and they just, every time they couldn't match the socks, the parents would just buy more. And it's like, surely the solution there is just buy the same color socks. Like, you don't need to. But yeah, so I imagine that's something where some people might, clearing out a room for some people might require several weeks of work. Mine was just a day.
Yeah, because you've considered yourself to be fairly minimalist before that.
I think so. Yeah. Is it something you consider?
Again, I've definitely got too many clothes. Like, I've got a big wardrobe and there's stuff in there that I just don't wear. But then it's also different because I used to work in a job where I wore a suit every single day, whereas now I work from home all the time. And when I go out to clients, I am smart, but I'm not in a suit and tie. So I've got loads of that in my wardrobe, like loads of like work shirts. And I'm like, I'll wear them at some point.
Yeah.
And then I've also like, not that I fluctuate massively in weight, but I do have some clothes where I'm like, when I'm heavier, I can wear that. Or when I'm like, and even like just recently with the photo shoot, I had like pairs of trousers that like the waist on them was just like out to like there. And my waist doesn't even change that much. It's just, I don't know what has happened.
So true about ties as well. Like suit and tie stuff. Like I think I had like 12 ties, and I remember thinking, no, I might use them at some point. I'm like, hang on, when did I last wear a tie?
Yeah.
Like maybe at a wedding, and that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mad. I'm trying to think what like my kitchen's pretty immaculate. My living room's pretty well laid out. But yeah, it's probably like stuff like clothes or like old documents and stuff like that are just lingering within my house. And well, I have a decent filing system, but like in the modern age where like you can go paperless on HMRC, you can like all your pay slips are sent to you via email now, and you log in with your national security number, or national insurance number. Whereas in the past, like my first grad job, I have like 4 years worth of monthly pay slips and pension updates and stuff like that. Whereas now you just get those emailed to you. So I guess I've got all of that.
That trend can't happen any faster. I hate paper. I'm so tired of getting like paper statements and stuff. And I'm like, guys, can you not just, and they're like, oh no, we don't have a computer system. I'm like, it's 2022, but I guess you probably know this better than me, that the financial and insurance sector is so ridden with regulation that I think it's quite difficult for them to switch to digital systems.
Yeah, it's a tick box to be able to be like, well, that's all been documented because they've received it via in physical copy.
See, it's just covering their ass.
Yeah, you should put a red receipt in the email, it'd be absolutely fine.
Yeah, there we go.
We're solving problems. You mentioned paper there, and obviously receipts are a type of paper, and we're probably going to talk about receipts at some point. But you removed...
Careful, Colin, you get me on my hobby horse
I know. You removed estrogens for 12 weeks. First of all, what made you do this?
The fact that both of us will recognize the value in that we are spending so much of our time optimizing for trying to get our natural hormonal profile as good as possible, optimizing our performance, our health, our body fat, muscle mass. And if there's a huge hole in the bucket of just chemical endocrine disruption, it just seems like a ridiculous waste. So I spoke to a guy called Anthony J, Dr. Anthony J, he's a PhD in estrogen, and he went through some of the impacts of environmental estrogens, xenoestrogens, which are kind of from chemical sources, and how they impact us, and also just how ubiquitous they are. Like absolutely everything that we come into contact with. So plastics, fragrances, cosmetics, receipts, polyethylene carpets, vinyl floors, all this stuff, like detergents that we wash our clothes with, even wearing clothes that have been washed with scented detergent is enough to affect our blood levels of phthalates and parabens. So there's so much bombardment. And I just thought, is there anything that I can do? It feels like a bit of a Sisyphean task, but can I eliminate some of the main sources? And so I did that. I switched a lot of my cosmetics to like as paraben free or estrogen free as I could find. I stopped microwaving and plastic. That was the big one.
Yep.
And I did some blood tests before and after, did a hormonal panel and discussed them with Anthony. And they generally improved over 12 weeks, which is pretty cool. That's a short time frame for a hormone change. Then I've retested recently, and all of my blood markers have improved once again. Obviously, I can't say causation. I'm just one person with a couple of blood tests, but it seems to be trending in the right direction.
So from that initial 12 weeks where you removed things quite aggressively in terms of trying to make some big changes, it improved. I knew that. But you've tested again since. What have you done in the kind of intervening period? Have you kept up some of the practices?
Yeah, I've kept up the practices. A lot of it's quite easy. Once you've made the choice, you switch to a different, like, for example, I think I've got my deodorant here that I use.
Yep.
Find it. Oh, that reminds me, Colin. This is for you.
Oh, I've got a segue. Some lovely chocolates, guys.
Lovely chocolates.
For those that are on audio only.
Yeah, I know you're post photo shoot now, so hopefully you can.
I can fit them in, don't worry.
Yeah. So, for example, this Salt of the Earth, assuming that's my camera.
Yeah.
This is like I've got a full list of all the substitutions I made, and I started like tweeting the companies and being like, excuse me, like what's this ingredient in your thing, and like
you are a menace, aren't you? Like.
Such a bastard. Like someone's drawn out a big table of like how different compounds will act on estrogen receptors in vitro, and so it's really difficult to get the information properly. But one of the things to look out for as well is parfum or fragrance, which you might have seen when you're reading the back of the shampoo label on. That is the catch-all term that they use to hide their proprietary blends, and that's usually where they put all the worst stuff in there. So luckily in the UK we don't have atrazine and these kind of more severe compounds, which is what Syngenta and Tyrone Hayes was looking at.
We're putting in the water basically.
Yeah.
Because the tap water, and since you've been up here, you'll notice the tap water in Scotland's much better than the tap water down south. It's not as hard. It's genuinely. It's just when I go to London and Manchester with work, I'm like, how do people drink this?
It's piss. Yeah.
Exactly. But I guess one of the things I try and do as a host, and you've always been very complimentary of that, is like think about the question that the listener would want to ask. So why should we be? You mentioned that like we want to try and reduce our estrogen, but why?
Sperm count has been dropping over the last 40, 50 years. We have to keep changing the reference range. Like what is now normal wouldn't be normal 40 years ago. I find that quite frightening.
It's like the basket of goods we use for inflation. They're like, yeah, you used to eat steak, but now it's dog food. And actually inflation is only at 8%.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And
you're testing a perfectly normal range, but like, I don't know, 40 years ago, your grandpa would be able to bench press you.
Yeah, it's shifting the goalposts. And, you know, I'm sure there's many factors. And the problem that I see is that there are things which are within our control. We won't find out from industry for another 50, 60 years. It'll be thalidomide or like all these things that there is, of course, a financial incentive to suppress this stuff. So you've got to say, like, what is reasonably practicable for me? What's going to not cause me a massive inconvenience, but I can still do to try and optimize this stuff? You know, also, the other impacts of estrogen, hormone-related cancers, metabolic syndrome, obesity, all these kind of things are impacted by this too. For me, the big high-yield thing is just not microwaving plastic. Microwaving Tupperware, any plastic that gets like rubbery when you heat it up, or have you ever had apologies, Paul, because I think I sound like a senile old man here, but something red or curry, tomatoey stuff in a Tupperware.
Yeah.
And
so when I used to meal prep, one of my dinners would be like tomato sauce pasta with mince. Like
that's it. You've now got pink Tupperware forever, and
that Tupperware would stain. And again, this would have actually been before. I think I listened to Dr. J. Campbell on Roanwar's podcast. Do you know Roanwar?
Yeah.
Oliver Anwar? This was years ago, and he said one of the big game changers is glass Tupperware. Easier to clean, doesn't stain, and also enables you to maintain your kind of test levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And what happens with the reason that stains is because the acidity in that stuff will interact with the surface area of the plastic, and it just exchanges molecules with it. So you're getting plastic leaching into your food and vice versa. So
switching to steel shaker, that was one of the big things for me as well.
Shout,
and also, if you've like, we're talking about staining like tomato sauces, whatever, within the Tupperware, protein shakers just once you've used it for a couple of weeks, like it's never the same. Whereas the steel shaker, I've had that. Well, I've got like 4 that I put in rotation. Let's not get into it. And yeah, they clean so well. Like I can drink water out of that fine without the lingering of like chocolate smooth or cinnamon Danish, whatever protein that I've had.
And if you've ever left a shaker in like a hot car overnight, game over, isn't it? You've just got to chuck it away.
Yeah, it's like melted.
So the other question that people might be asking is, well, why can't I just take an estrogen blocker? Can I not just take tamoxifen? Can I just take clomiphene?
A cancer drug, isn't it?
Tamoxifen's used in breast cancers. Clomiphene used as a...
you see a lot of guys use it as a
post-cycle
therapy, or even during a blast of steroids to minimize like gyno and acne?
In the context of steroids, it's a whole different game because you're then artificially kind of messing with stuff. But for the average person taking clomiphene, I asked Anthony this and I was like, surely that's a simple solution because there's so much bombardment, you can't avoid all of it. And he was like, unfortunately, it's not that simple. There's multiple estrogen receptors. And if you block something at the receptor level, you're going to increase at the production level. And then you end up kind of causing other problems. There's new drugs called the selective estrogen receptor destroyers, which like fulvestrant, which can actually destroy the receptor completely. But again, it's like trying to pull out one thing in a complex machine and then all the other bits have to compensate. And so for me, short of taking testosterone, I feel like some simple lifestyle changes will do.
Yeah. What was the kind of other changes you made as well? You don't like touching receipts anymore?
Yeah, I used to just rub them all over my face in the mornings, but now I've had to stop doing that.
That surprised me when it was like, oh, receipts are like very high in estrogen.
Apparently, massively, yeah. It's so now like also like unless you need it for tax reasons.
Yeah, why?
We just default to take the receipt and we're like, oh well, no, what do I do with this? It's just more waste as well.
Yeah, exactly that. You've been climate friendly and testosterone friendly as well. No, that is funny. So the blood panel results showed that you'd had improvement, but what about anecdotally? Like, how do you feel?
I struggle with that because I think there's so
you
many...
looked similar as well. Your before and after shots, for those that haven't seen the video, you have similar looking muscle mass. You have similar looking levels of like prominence of that muscle as well. Like you're not massively leaner, or like, and your body weight's similar as well.
Yeah, that's very observant. Like I'd be surprised if there was a significant change. Obviously, I've been training for some time, and to have a sudden change in 12 weeks, that would be like, whoa, okay, this stuff's really potent. So I guess I wasn't expecting a huge amount. And Anthony did say one of the other things that you can do, and I don't understand the mechanism for this, but he said having muscle mass is a great way to sweep up excess estrogen. So I guess all the more reason to lift weights, get jacked. Yeah, there's so many downstream benefits from it.
Yeah, it is interesting. It actually links into one of the other areas that we agreed that we're going to talk about today, and that is you did a video such a long time ago, March 2018. I went and found it, the movement seems to be more popular than ever before in terms of talking about it. But it's no FAP, so that is not watching porn, not ejaculating, not masturbating. Like you did a video back in March 2018 when I hadn't really heard about the concept as much, whereas now it's so prominent on Twitter in particular, and lots of different circles, guys are talking about it. And it does relate a little bit to people talking about like, oh, like keep your testosterone levels high, or like it's beta to like watch lots of porn. Like these terms are thrown around a lot. What was your kind of take on it at that point? And let's kind of bring it up to modern day.
Good question. So as a framing, as you say, NoFap is the practice of not jerking the gherkin and just as a permanent thing. And there's a lot of different mechanisms that people claim. It's got a massive cult following. People claiming things like they're gaining muscle, they're more productive, that women are approaching them out of nowhere because of their vibe, and that they're
giving off pheromones and stuff like that.
Yeah, that they're able to concentrate more. All this kind of really like superhuman claims. Now, first of all, there's the magic pill effect. There's the fact that if everyone's doing something and it feels like there's just a single thing that's the solution to everything, that by doing that, oh, that's unlocking the potential for all this stuff. Or there's the conspiracy aspect of people trying to keep us docile, with all these kind of angles that people take. And if you read the forums, people are fanatical about it, aren't they? Now, if we look at the science, testosterone is one of the claims. There is a transient increase in testosterone at day 7 of sexual abstinence, and then it goes away. Nothing really to write home about. Probably the main mechanism, and I think the reason that people are actually claiming big benefits from them, I'm not doubting them, but is the dopamine sensitivity, and the kind of what they're doing is they're stopping an addiction. And so if someone is in a pathological state, if they're a pathological fapper, and then they go from that to not doing it, they've saved 4 hours a day.
Yep.
Of course they're going to be able to look someone in the eye, and they're going to be able to operate.
They're going to feel much better, yeah.
Yeah, they'll have more time. They're not going to be exhausted, etc. So
that's a massive lifestyle change. It's the same as like somebody who maybe was like very obese suddenly starts training and tracking their nutrition. Like, wow, I feel so much better. And you're
I
like,
think it's because they dropped carbs, and it's like
because you went from A to Z, you went from A to Z or 0 to 100 or whatever. So I can see huge benefits for somebody who's able to move away from like a challenging relationship with it to abstinence entirely.
Absolutely. And I used to be very religious. I've had long periods of abstinence. Didn't notice much difference. It's just something that I think it depends on your starting point, as you say. There is a kind of spiritual claim that, you know, preserving your life essence and your jing and being able to like move it around your body and all that stuff. Like I'm not spiritually advanced enough to be able to make any kind of claims about that. But there's also there's a lot of stuff on porn, and I think that's probably the more damaging thing from a neurochemical perspective.
100%. Like that's the more interesting part of it, rather than just the masturbation part. It's actually what you're watching and what you're becoming accustomed to and related to. And I've spoken to Josh Shea, who was a recovered porn addict, and he spoke very well on the impact that removing that from your life can have.
Interesting. Well, like intuitively, watching someone else copulate is not something we're really wired to do, and it's a bit of
evolutionary.
The fact that there's infinite pools of it, so it's infinite novelty of people who, you know, have bodies that don't look like normal humans, and then there's all the kind of weird subtypes and perversions and all that kind of stuff too. And so it's that there's an argument that the dopamine seeking behavior is looking for novelty, and not necessarily like sexual appealingness, but just like something that's crazy and extreme and new. And so then that starts to create kind of
we're progressive people, aren't we? Like it's the same, like we try and progressively overload in the gym, we progressively overload what we're watching.
Well, yeah, there we go. So there's all of that, and if you're kind of frying out your dopamine receptors with more and more novel and crazy and violent stimulus and all that kind of stuff, like of course, that's not going to be good for the brain. There's a study looking at rats, and I think there's a guy who has done a lot of science on this stuff, where they looked at the erectile response of rats in response to a new female rat, and it would go up above baseline and then drop, and then they introduced a new female rat and a new one, and they kept introducing new sexual novelty until eventually the rats weren't able to achieve that erectile function. And it was getting below baseline, so they were becoming desensitized to novel sexual stimulus. And there's no doubt that's what's happening now, and we're seeing 15-year-olds with erectile dysfunction. Like that should not be the case.
Yep.
So
maybe it's because of the estrogen as well.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to extricate all these different factors, isn't it?
It's interesting you mentioned that there was some data where testosterone kind of was improving after 7 days, because I know that boxers like try and abstain from even just sex, so not just masturbation, before like a fight, because it can peak like their ability to tap into different stores or whatever else. And I have shared this in a podcast before, but people might not have heard this. But I was told once when I was maybe like 17 that if you masturbate or have sex on leg day, your ability to train as well and like improve your leg muscle mass was reduced. And I genuinely like I built the habit, and then I just like adhered to it for years, even without thinking. And I've actually built some decent quads. So
well, there we go.
Anecdotally,
must be it.
The NoFap community will like me for that one particular.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a weird like, and Twitter particularly loves to fetishize certain things. So they go through cycles. Like the Twitter guru sphere love to kind of, they're on a bit of an eggs hobby horse at the moment, and then it becomes like perineum sunning and NoFap and black coffee and cold showers and like all these different things. Like all of them are fine. Like I'm not, you know, if you want to go and do NoFap, if you want to have cold showers, like none of them are good or bad in themselves, but it's the magic pillism that seems to come out from this stuff.
I think sometimes it can be a gateway though. Like, so if you can get control over watching porn and masturbating 2, 3, 4 hours a day, whatever it is, if it starts to get towards that, then you can put that time into other things which could benefit you much more, whether that's a business, your studies, exercise, cooking your own food, even socializing. And actually, or like one of the big appealing factors that I think is like, if you aren't satisfying or itching or scratching that itch yourself, are you more determined to go out and get a real woman rather than like making love virtually.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I suppose I'm not very sympathetic to that because I'm in a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not really much of a fapper. So it's not something that features in my mind. And so I see these kind of forums and I'm like, oh, it's a bit weird. But I suppose, of course it is. It's a bit pathological if someone is like experiencing massive gains. And I don't know if you've seen any of the like incel stuff.
Bits and pieces. Actually, a lot of it was through an interview Chris did on Modern Wisdom with a lady in that community. She like researched them. But yeah, it appears to be a growing community of men who are like involuntary celibate, which is just an incredible concept.
It's a really fascinating thing. There was a BBC documentary about it, and there was a guy who used to set up Tinder profiles of like a jacked black model, and he was like I think like Hispanic guy who didn't look like a model at all. And he would set up dates with people at McDonald's, and then like he'd make them wait 20 minutes, and he'd burst in and be like, you slut! Like you only would go out with me because you thought I looked like him, but you'd never go out with me actually. And like
crazy.
And then like the interviewer was like, do you think that perhaps the reason that the women are not wanting to go out with you is because of your attitude? And he's like, no, man, it's because this guy in the photo, like he's got the jawline and he's got the whatever. And
he'd like really analysed like what he would need to have to be successful women.
Yeah, they'd really like focused in on like physical characteristics. And it was so interesting, the blind spots. And they got like 4 different incels. One of them was like very bitter. One of them was just a bit of a dweeb and like kind of down on himself and didn't really like just never really tried. The third guy tried to do Lux Max, which is like their protocol for like saying like, oh, you've not won the genetic lottery, but let's like see what you can
maximize your potential.
Yeah, so he'd like taken steroids and tried to do all this kind of stuff, and I think the steroids went wrong, and he ended up with like some acne, and then the fourth guy, it was just like different kind of genres of incel. It was so fascinating to see.
Broadchurch.
But I think these forums just reinforce things, and then similar to a lot of the other movements we've talked about, they become a prophecy, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I think they certainly do. And like when I hear about it, I think like if it can help you gain back control, then I'm like, right, okay, well, all power to you. But if you're somewhere in the middle where it's like relatively casual use, and I don't know what casual use looks like, it's probably different for every single person, then I can see where it comes from. But
well, it comes down to your value of personal responsibility, because if it gives you a scapegoat and say, it's because of the jawline and I can't change that, so or it's because of women only like this type of man and I'm not, and so then it's a lost game. And it, people prefer that because it gives them a sense of identity and a sense of like, oh well, it's not my fault. So, but that's not the kind of life that I think either of us want to live.
No, you want to take some sort of responsibility. So a productivity hack that we can probably get behind is if you are a massive fapper, stop fapping so much. But
say 4 hours a day.
Yeah, but we spoke a lot about productivity the last time. But since we recorded maybe like September 2021, what are some of the things that you've started to explore recently?
So in terms of essentials, I'm a massive Apple fanboy. I just think
you're now on Apple Notes now, aren't you? You were transitioning away from Notion, I think it was.
Well remembered. So we still use Notion for shared databases and project management and stuff because it's great for that. But as an external brain, I used to use Evernote, and Evernote was just basically kamikazed themselves as a company. So I've switched over to Apple Notes. I'd always prefer to be in the Apple ecosystem because I just think the synchronization and stuff. There's a lot of new note-taking apps and a lot of note perverts that you'll see online that are kind of deep into all the kind of fancy features. And they're great, but I'm happy to sacrifice advanced features for speed, accessibility, ease of search, ease of capture, because I think that's really the majority of where you interact with your notes.
Yeah.
Particularly for coaches as well, they need an external brain. I think a lot of people think that, if I'm not a kind of knowledge worker, I don't need that, or if I'm not an academic or whatever. You still have an external brain, whether you like it or not, but if it's just a fragmented bad system of like Word documents on your computer in a folder somewhere, that's going to be a mess. So even if it's just for personal admin, it's something to have.
Yeah, consider. Phone's gone off. What What have you introduced that's new then as a kind of a way to wrap us up, Yusuf? Like what have you introduced that's new since September? What have you changed to? What have you added in?
I've tried to go all in on Apple stuff. So I think Safari and Notes and so on. Alfred is the big one.
Yep.
And if you've seen anything from us, you'll know that I'm just an absolute evangelist for that. Other productivity hacks. Do you know what? I'm going to use my external brain.
Yep.
and see if there's anything that comes to mind. The problem is, like, once you solve problems like this, they become so unconscious that you don't think about them anymore because they're just a process that you've solved. And it happens a lot with business where there's a solution to something, you automate it, and then you never think about the process again. Then you go, oh God, remember when we were doing that manually? And it's insane. In terms of sleep, I would recommend getting a pregnancy pillow.
Okay, so that's coming because ultimately, if you can look after that, then your productivity during the day is going to be higher.
Yeah,
so that's
very much.
The one that goes between your legs.
It's a big V shape, and if you're, especially if you lift or something, you find that when you're sleeping, you kind of hunch over, so it spaces out your shoulders and your pelvis, and you're not like sweaty with your legs kind of mashed together. So that's very good. Not always popular with the partner, and it's a little bit.
If you're nicer and more affectionate during the day because you've slept better, then
you're a more present person to. Exactly. There we go. So
put up with this for 8 hours a night, and I'll be wonderful during the other 16 hours.
Strong mental gymnastics there. So yeah, that's I'll definitely have to use that. So in terms of productivity, I have got a full framework for this, but the basic thing is it's not very sexy advice. What is more important than how?
Yep.
So you need to know. Sorry, why? Why is more important
Why
than
is
what?
More important now?
Because you can be more efficient at something, but if it's taking you in the wrong direction, then you've caused yourself more problems in the future. Tidy space, tidy mind. So just having a clear desk, getting rid of any bits of paper, scanning them in, putting them in the relevant slots, hence hiring a professional organizer.
Yep. And then the anti-paper crusade.
Yeah, exactly. Then you've got capture, review, and do. These are the 3 elements of any productivity system. I have gone all into TickTick at the minute, which is the app that I use. Johnny uses OmniFocus and he's switched to Things recently, but TickTick's just the one. I think, like, having tried basically every one and having maybe an obsessional focus with trying to find like the perfect productivity app, like it's the closest thing to it. And it should be a separate thing to your notes app because tasks are transient. You don't want them in your brain forever. Getting some milk next week isn't something that you need in your archives.
No.
So
something you want to tick off and move on from.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been probably the biggest thing to just keep me on track because it's got a built-in calendar. You can time box out things. It's Pomodoro timer, subtasks, you can allocate people.
Time boxing's been the big thing for me because I used to have just to-do list after to-do list after to-do list, and sometimes you would feel guilt for not getting through it, and you're like, well, actually, I know that's like a 2-hour task, and I haven't put any time in for it. So when was I ever going to do that? And when I had Nirial on the podcast, and he was just like to-do lists are fine, but if you don't allocate the time out, so for example, between 9 and 10, Colin, you will be making prospecting calls and work. Between 10 and 11, you will be doing your follow-up emails. If that's not there, then everything just mashed into one. And at some point, you're like, well, I did my calls, but I never did my emails because I never agreed when I was going to do that.
It's so true. And this, a lot of people think that it's sacrilegious to have calendar and to-do list on the same thing, but I'm very much on board with you, and I'd love to hear that near EL podcast as well, because
he was really good.
He's a very clear thinker, and like tasks take time, so you have to allocate a block of time. It just seems to make the most sense to me. And if you can set up the Pomodoro timer and so on. So yeah, that's a huge one for me. Single tasking as well. After years of technology pushing you to try and multitask, and the way that interfaces are set up with multiple tabs and split screen and all this stuff, made me realize that it doesn't make you more productive. It just makes you feel more productive.
Yes, multiple things happening.
Yeah, you brain stimulated, but actually sitting down and just doing one thing and getting obsessed with completing a task is the quickest way to get stuff done. And it's such a boring, unsexy thing. And I think the more I kind of nerd out on this stuff and loop back and look back on my insights and notes and lessons, it always comes down to quite boring and unsexy implementation of basic stuff.
Yeah.
Really the synthesis, as I was doing an annual review and trying to look at like, where have I made the most progress in any aspect of my life? It just comes down to know what reps to do and do the reps.
Yeah.
And I think you're a great example of that with the podcast. Like it's gone from strength to strength because you've known the reps, you've improved your technique, and you've done the reps.
Yeah, and you can like you say, like it's so basic when you apply a fitness concept to other areas of your life, but it certainly has transferred over. And myself, David Hatt, and Chris, who are kind of regulars who do a roundtable together, a little bit of a version of life hacks that you could do on Modern Wisdom. We're doing a live show at War on the Walk, which is like a kind of CrossFit competition.
Oh, nice.
In Scotland, and we're talking about fitness as a gateway drug to success in business and career. Those guys from a business perspective, me from a career perspective, and the way that you've used that analogy there, I'll probably be borrowing it, and I'll name check you, don't worry.
Oh man,
I'll be like, guys, go check out Propane Fitness.
Thank you.
But yeah, in terms of people continuing the conversation with Yusef, where should they head towards?
So at Propane Fitness on any platform, so particularly Twitter and YouTube is the big ones that we're on at the moment. But we're on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, propanefitness.com. And if you're interested, if you're a trainer or a coach and you want some help with systems to leverage your expertise and deliver it to more people, have a look at our podcast called Grow Your Online Fitness Business. And that's up on Spotify.
I've been on there as well, so it's a great
yeah,
podcast,
there's an absolutely cracking guest on there. So, yeah,
exactly
one of the very few. So
yeah, no, it's been a pleasure to get together today, Yusef. Let's go get caffeinated and train. And
do it.
I'll be back to speak to you all again, guys, very, very soon.